Welcome to the deep dive. Ready for a dark one? Today we're going deep on Richard Biegenwald.
Biegenwald. A name that chills New Jersey to the bone, even all these years later.
I mean, we're talking serious serial killer territory here. But what's fascinating, at least to me, is trying to understand what makes a guy like that tick.
That's what we're here for, right? This deep dive, we've got court docs, psych evils, even some old newspaper stories.
You sent over a whole file on him. It's crazy.
Yeah, we're going to piece together the how and the why, what Biegenwald did, but also who he was.
All right, so let's start at the beginning. Richard Biegenwald, born Staten Island, 1940. And right off the bat, his childhood, man, it's rough.
It's textbook case, almost. Violent, alcoholic father, that kind of early trauma, it leaves scars,
Cheap ones, I bet. And it seems like it manifested early on. 5 years old, this kid sets fire to his family's home.
5 years old? I mean, come on. At that age, most kids are afraid of the dark, not setting things ablaze.
Exactly. This wasn't just like playing with matches. This was something else entirely.
Oh, yeah. There were some serious underlying issues there. This incident, it's what first lands him in the psychiatric system.
Right.
Starts this whole pattern of going in and out of institutions throughout his childhood.
I was reading about that. He even underwent electroshock therapy at 9 years old.
9. Can you imagine? That was pretty common back then, but the long-term effects, especially on a developing brain, who knows?
It's mind-boggling. So he's in and out of these institutions, but it doesn't seem like they're actually addressing the root of his problems, right?
Right. Back then, the focus was on punishment, containment. Not so much on rehabilitation. Understanding of childhood trauma. Pretty limited.
So the system kind of failed him in a way.
It's a tough question. Not excusing his actions, but it makes you wonder, with the right help, could things have been different? It's a debate in criminology. Nature versus nurture. How much is hardwired, how much is environment?
We may never know the full answer to that one. But let's move on to a turning point. 1958, Biegenwald is 18 years old, and he commits his first murder.
Yeah, this is where things take a dark turn. Botched robbery of a grocery store in Bayonne, New Jersey. He shoots and kills the owner, Steven Slodowski.
Just a kid, really, and already taken a life.
And here's the kicker. Slodowski wasn't just some shopkeeper. He was an attorney, a former prosecutor.
Whoa, the irony. Talk about a twisted fate.
It's almost like it was foreshadowing, right? This collision course with the law that was set in motion from that moment on. He gets a life sentence for that murder, but hold on tight, because this is where it gets crazy. He's paroled after just 17 years.
17 years for murder. What were they thinking?
Well, you got to remember the context. 1970s, the thinking around rehabilitation was very different. This belief that even hardened criminals could be reformed. Looking back, it seems naive, maybe even dangerous.
So they thought they were giving him a second chance, not unleashing him to cause more harm?
It's hard to say for sure, but that was the prevailing thought. Different world back then. Now it's all about risk assessment, monitoring offenders long term.
And that brings us to what I'm calling the calm before the storm. Biegenwald gets out in 75, and for a few years he's seemingly under the radar, working odd jobs, trying to blend in.
But there are cracks. 1977, he's suspected in a rape case and becomes a fugitive. It's like this glimpse of the monster still lurking beneath the surface.
Waiting for the right moment to strike again.
Exactly. And strike again he did. He resurfaces in Asbury Park, New Jersey. New wife, and get this, a chilling new accomplice. Darren Fitzgerald.
Fitzgerald's just a teenager at the time, right? That's what gets me, this guy's ability to manipulate people, draw them into his web of darkness.
And with Fitzgerald, it's especially disturbing given his young age. This marks the beginning of Biegenwald's deadliest period. Between 1981 and 1983, the body count starts to rise.
And that's where we'll pick up next time.
It's like those years in prison. Instead of rehab, it's like they twisted him up even more, that rage just festering.
And then it explodes, right? And tragically, it's mostly young women who become his victims during this time.
Yeah, a lot of them. Lured into his car, often. It's that classic predator playbook. Prey on vulnerability, offer help that turns deadly.
There are a couple cases that really got to me reading through this stuff. Anna Olesevich, just 18 years old, shot 4 times in the head, left behind a Burger King.
God, that was awful. It's almost random, like he wasn't fixated on a certain type of victim, just this pent-up rage that could explode on anyone.
It's terrifying to think about. And then there's William Ward. He was a prison escapee. Biegenwald shoots him multiple times, buries him in a shallow grave. That one felt different, like a different motive, maybe?
You're picking up on something there. Ward, he's not just some random guy.
Mm.
Likely had ties to Biegenwald's own criminal past. It's like a settling of scores, maybe.
Yeah.
or showing dominance.
Makes you think, how many other secrets did this guy take to the grave? We know he was suspected in at least 2 other murders he was never charged with.
Right, and who knows how many more there might be. Serial killers, they tend to escalate. He was only active for a few years before they caught him.
It's unsettling to think about. Families out there maybe still searching for answers, not knowing.
Yeah, that's the sad part. But hey, you never know. Forensics keeps advancing. Cold case detectives, they're dedicated. Maybe someday those families will get the answers they need.
Hope so. Okay, so how did they finally catch this guy? It all comes down to, of all things, a friend of Biegenwald's wife.
Yep. This friend, she'd actually seen the body of one of the victims, hidden in the garage. Imagine that, the horror.
I can't even. But she did the right thing. Went straight to the cops.
Oh, she's the unsung hero of this whole thing, no doubt. They surround Biegenwald's house, tense standoff, finally arrest him. But wait, it gets weirder. Searching the place, they find guns, pipe bombs, drugs, the whole 9 yards. And then a live puff adder.
Wait, back up. A puff adder, that's a seriously venomous snake, right?
Oh.
What was he doing with that?
Beats me. It's one of those details that's always bugged investigators. Intimidating rivals, maybe? Or planning future murders, who knows? Some folks think it shows this deeper thing, a fascination with pain, beyond just the violence.
Creepy. And don't forget, Duran Fitzgerald, the accomplice. They find him hiding in a secret room during the raid, armed to the teeth.
Fitzgerald, he ends up cooperating, turns state's evidence, leads them to more bodies, even some buried at Biegenwald's mother's house in Staten Island.
Man, this whole thing is just messed up. So, with Fitzgerald talking and all the evidence piling up, Biegenwald's done. Convicted of 6 murders, life in prison, dies there in 2008.
Case closed, but so many questions still hanging in the air. Were there other victims? What drove him to such brutality? And the big one, can we learn from this, stop it from happening again?
That's the real question, isn't it? We'll have to dive deeper into that after the break. You know, as we've been talking about this stuff, it's like those specific cases, their stories, they just stick with you.
Oh, absolutely.
Like Anna Alisevich, the one found behind the Burger King. What else can you tell me about her?
Her case, man, it's just heartbreaking because of how young she was. Just 18, walking along the boardwalk when Biegenwald lured her into his car. The details of what happened, they're just too awful to even talk about. But that level of violence, it just points to this rage that's almost impossible to understand.
It makes you think, like, what was going through his head at that point? Was it just about power,
Yeah.
and control, or was there a sexual element to it, too?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Uh,
Criminologists and forensic psychologists, they've been trying to figure that out for ages, whether there's sexual assault involved or not. It can tell you a lot about what makes a killer tick. With Biegenwald, it's not so clear-cut. Some victims were clothed, some weren't, so maybe sexual gratification played a role sometimes, but it wasn't the main thing. The main thing, it seems, was domination, asserting his power over these women in the most brutal way possible.
It's chilling, and it all ties back to what we were talking about before, right? His messed up childhood, that need for control, manipulating people. It's like all these pieces of this puzzle, they fit together to make this really disturbing picture.
Exactly. And, another thing, Biegenwald's victims, they were all different ages, different backgrounds. He didn't have a type. So it really does seem like the violence was more about opportunity, and just letting loose all that pent-up rage rather than fulfilling some specific fantasy.
Okay, so let's talk about William Ward for a second. The prison escapee found buried in the shallow grave. That case always seemed different to me, like more personal somehow.
Yeah, you're right to point that out. Ward's case, it stands out because he wasn't just some random person. He probably had some connection to Biegenwald's criminal past and the way he was killed, execution style, that secret burial. It all suggests a different motive, something beyond those random acts of violence we see with his other victims.
So maybe Biegenwald saw him as a threat or a rival in the criminal world, or was he trying to send a message, like a warning to anyone who might cross him?
Those are good theories.
Yeah.
Biegenwald was a master manipulator. He loved having power and control over people, so it's not hard to imagine him taking out someone he saw as a challenge to his authority, or maybe someone who could rat him out, and risk his freedom.
Man, it just adds another layer to this whole messed up story, and it makes me think about those unsolved cases, the 2 murders he was suspected of but never charged with. Could there be a connection there? Could those victims have been involved in his criminal activities too?
It's definitely something to think about.
Yeah.
Serial killers, they often escalate their crimes over time. And since Biegenwald was only active for a few years before they caught him, it's possible there are other crimes out there that we just don't know about.
It's a scary thought, and it makes you wonder what other secrets he took to the grave with him. But even with all these questions we're left with, are there any lessons we can take away from all this? Anything that can help us stop something like this from happening again?
That's what we're always hoping for, right? To learn from the past so we can make the future safer. We can't predict who's going to become a violent criminal, but there's some red flags. Some things that might point to trouble, like we've talked about abuse and neglect in childhood. That's a big one. Also early signs of aggression, cruelty to animals, fascination with fire setting. Those can all be signs that something's wrong.
So, what can we do? How do we take this knowledge and actually use it to make a difference?
It starts with awareness.
Yeah.
Parents, teachers, everyone in the community. We need to be aware of these warning signs and step in early. It's about creating a support system for people who are at risk, giving them the resources they need to break free from that cycle of violence. And we need to address the bigger issues too, things like poverty, inequality, access to mental health care. All those things create an environment where crime can flourish.
It's a huge challenge, no doubt, but I think what we really need to take away from this deep dive is that we can't just sit back and do nothing. We have to keep asking questions, keep pushing for change, keep shining a light on this darkness, so hopefully we can prevent another Biegenwald from happening.
I agree completely. Knowledge and understanding, that's our best defense against evil. When we study the past, when we understand what motivates people to do terrible things, that's how we can learn to spot the warning signs and step in before it's too late.
And that's what this deep dive has been all about, right? A journey into the dark side of humanity, not to glorify it, but to learn from it and to try to make the world a little bit safer. So until next time, keep diving, keep asking questions, and keep searching for the truth. And remember, if you or someone you know is struggling, please reach out for help. There's always hope, and there are people who care.
Well said. Until next time.